As you know, the John Gotti trial continues. Sammy the Bull Gravano has testified. He's been cross-examined. Mickey Rourke, the actor, showed up as a supporter, or said he was a friend of John Gotti, was there at the trial. A lot of people continue to watch it. It continues to get a lot of national publicity in all of the major newspapers, news magazines, and television shows. No one has covered this trial and the participants more closely than John Miller. He is a reporter for WNBC television here in New York, but also gets a lot of airtime on the network, and I'm pleased to have him join us now to give us an update on this trial that everybody is watching with abject fascination. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Update me since the last time we talked in terms of what's happened because of politics and because of some charges of rape and other having to do with athletes. This thing has been bumped off the front page, but it continues in Brooklyn.
And I think it'll be back to the front page. The basic picture of the trial now is they seem to be through the key tapes that have to do with murder, and they seem to be through Sam Gravano, Gotti's underboss, who, after his direct testimony and then his cross-examination, which many observers looked on as the defense's big opportunity here, has emerged unscathed.
You think a sports metaphor, they did not lay a glove on him?
They did not lay a glove on him.
Yeah, and this guy was, I mean, David Lewis was here, and others said this guy that's representing John Gotti, Krieger, I think his name is, from Miami, the attorney, was a brilliant cross-examiner, but he did not break Gravano.
He did not break Gravano. Gravano was a very well-prepared witness, and a witness who had so much baggage that they put on the table ahead of him that, I mean, once a guy admits to 19 murders, what bad can you find to say about him?
Yeah, you can say he's a liar.
Right. Can you say, well, there was 20? You know?
But is there any reading and any feeling about his credibility? I mean, is there a sense, I don't know whether you can read this, and clearly jurors have their own independent mind.
You clearly can't read a jury, but the way Gravano came across to us in the courtroom...
Right. You may not like this guy, but he's telling the truth?
No. Believable? Yes.
And John Gotti, how did he react to him when he was testifying and during the cross-examination?
It wasn't even so much how Gotti reacted to him, because he reacted to him with contempt throughout. John Gotti will sit there and he'll like shake his head like this and he'll go like that, and he'll put on a constant show so that the jury sees that he's disbelieving, unhappy, displeased, and so that the courtroom press will. What was interesting is how Gravano reacted to Gotti.
How did he?
He locked onto the prosecutor in the beginning.
Yeah.
And as it went, and he got more confident, and he seemed to score more points, and he became more comfortable, even during the cross-examination, he would lean forward to look at Gotti. Even when they were at the sidebar, at one point, although we couldn't hear what, they exchanged some utterances, some lip reading or something. He just got more chutzpah as he went along.
Yeah. And what about the tapes? And what are they saying, and how damaging do you think they are? Is it clear? Is it incredibly incriminating as you listen to them?
Well, the tapes and Gravano make a deadly marriage
the combination.
For John Gotti, because you have the tapes, and they certainly sound like criminal tapes. When you realize the baggage the prosecutor has, they have to prove two things. They have to prove that, yes, there is an enterprise called the Gambino crime family and a larger enterprise called the Mafia, and that this enterprise was used to commit a series of crimes which will then go on and prove. Well, I mean, you can't beat the enterprise proof when John Gotti says, this is a Borgata, meaning a family. This is a Cosa Nostra, meaning the Mafia, and it's going to be a Cosa Nostra until I die. Sammy, do you want to be underboss? Do you want to be acting boss? Do you want to be consigliere? I mean, he runs through the litany.
It's right out of the movies, isn't it? I mean, it's almost using the same terms we've heard, and it's almost like the life imitating art.
Absolutely. So when you get past the enterprise proof, then you have tapes where he says, Louis de Bono, you know why he's dying? He's dying because he didn't rob nothing, didn't do nothing wrong. But when I called him, he didn't come.
Yeah. This is Gotti saying that on the tape.
And Di Bernardo, the reason I whacked him, well, I didn't whack him, but I allowed it to happen. I was in the can at the time, was because, I mean, he lays it out. Yeah. Now you bring on Gravano and say, well, tell us about Di Bernardo. Why did he get whacked? Tell us about Louis
Whack
de Bono.
is the term for shooting, assassinating,
Whack is
killing.
the term for murder.
Right.
And Gravano then lays on the background. Tough combination, tough to beat.
Yeah. The prosecution is doing a good job? Are they effective? I mean,
The prosecution has been walking the line of trying to get in everything they can without throwing in the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
I mean, their problem in past trials has been to over-try cases without enough. Now they've got all they want. All they have to do is watch out that they don't overwhelm the jury. I mean, the real question was, did they need Gravano?
Yeah.
I mean, did they need to excuse a guy with 19 murders, some say 35? Do they need to give him a pass to get John Gotti?
As you've said in earlier conversations we've had, they were so much at risk in not getting a conviction this time, they were scared not to add it on and to make it part of the mix.
I've always seen this as a battle of the titans. John Gotti had beaten prosecutors 3 times. The idea that a hood, if you will, a guy who works out of a social club on Mulberry Street in New York's Little Italy, could walk into the federal court of the United States of America, take on the entire Justice Department from the U.S. Attorney down through the FBI, and beat them, walking out 4 for 4, would make such a mockery out of law enforcement that they could not afford to lose it. The idea of losing it frightened them so that they said, Sammy, never mind 19 murders, tell us the story.
Yeah. As close as you are to this story, having covered it from every angle, has anything come out of the trial that surprises you?
Well, we all learned our Gotti history in dribs and drabs from law enforcement experts, from other informants. We learned from one witness that Gotti stood on 2nd Avenue with the hitmen on the Castellano murder set and said, you guys shouldn't be here, you should be up there, he's going to be here any minute. We learned that the commission sanctioned that murder. Now, with the advent of Gravano interpreting the tapes differently and the wealth of information he has, it's as if the prosecutors have said, hello, history, get me rewrite.
Yeah.
Now Gravano says he was never on 2nd Avenue.
He was
on
in a
the
car
street.
with me.
He was in a car with me. The commission never sanctioned the hit. We were told to lie about it to everybody, other mob families, our own people, because you can't hit a boss without going to the commission, and we didn't do that.
And they never did that.
So, I mean, there have been surprises.
And why didn't, if that's true, why didn't the commission react against Gotti once he did it, since he had not gotten approval?
Well, Castellano wasn't such a popular boss, and according to Gravano, Gotti took an informal straw poll, not going to the other bosses per se, but going to their friends through their backdoor diplomatic channels and saying, supposing Paul got murdered, what would happen to us? Would there be a very bad reaction? Not saying that we're going to do it, but what would happen? And the other family said, nothing.
Testing the wind.
Yeah.
Sending up a trial balloon.
One family, the Colombo, said, what's taking so long? Go.
Yeah. What's the feeling among the Gotti camp? Is his lawyer talking? Do they feel it's going against him? Do you have some sense? I see where they assume they asked Mr. Mickey Rourke, the actor, to come in.
The theater of it is certainly incredible. I mean, the Gravano Gotti moments,
right?
The guest of the day, if you will.
Yeah, but is that effective, and why are these people doing it? I mean, why would an actor like that do it? And then I read there were other actors that were prepared to come in.
When you ask them, I mean, Cindy Adams from the New York Post, well-known New York columnist, came in and sat with the Gotti camp in the front row instead of with the press.
And why did she do that?
She just said, you know, she was interested, and she had friends there. And then, of course, Jay Black from Jay and the Americans came and sat in the front row or the second row with Gotti's people. This is the glitzy level. Now, there's a sub-rosa level here because Gravano's adopted son sat in the second row. Every day he testified.
With the Gotti people?
With the Gotti people, as a message. You up there in the witness stand, you are a rat and you shame me. Victims of Gravano's murders, family members came to court so he could see them and they could see him. Of course, Mickey Rourke shows up. There's going to be more celebrities coming.
Like
I think
whom?
the theory is we got 16 people sitting up there, jurors and alternates. One of them has to be a big fan of somebody's. Let's show them that people like us in the Gotti camp, maybe people they like.
Back to my original question, though, is there any sense that the Gotti people feel that they are saying, are they sending out the message that we are worried, this is going against us, we can sense it? Our pulse tells us the same thing that reporters are writing.
They came in saying this is a dead bang winner. The worst mistake they made was taking on Sammy Bull. Now we're gonna walk out of here. They don't say that anymore. They're visibly worried. They talk about the appeal.
Is there any sense that John Gotti is prepared to go to jail? That he, because there's some things on the tapes in which he said, if I even go to jail, the conversation he had.
He says, me, number one, I like jail better than the streets.
He said that?
Yeah.
Why has he never talked to you? I mean, you've sort of walked along the street with him. You've had a microphone in his face.
I've talked to him in the street.
Yeah.
I mean, without a camera.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't talk about the mob. You know, we talk about baseball or something. Or
why will he not talk to you, though? I mean, what?
If you get
because you did talk to Gambino, didn't you not?
Sure.
For 4 or 5 minutes.
Sure. But I mean, if you get to know the Gotti from the tapes,
right.
You know, there's two John Gottis. There's a public John Gotti.
Dapper Dan, and then there's the guy in the Raven Street Club or whatever it is.
And in the Ravenite Club, if that's the real John Gotti, talking to me would be against his code. A New York columnist, Mike McLary, made a very interesting observation, which is the cross-examination of Gravano on the stand was based on things that we in the press knew, things that were on the public record. They weren't pulling out the nasty little things that only John Gotti would know about Sam Gravano. It shows that this is a guy who sticks to his code so closely that he won't even rat to his own lawyers on the rat that's going to put him away forever.
Do you believe that, though? I mean, do you believe with all that's at stake that he would not tell his lawyer? You know what?
I know that John Gotti, if anyone, knows the extra dirt on Sam Gravano that we don't know. I mean, if anybody
knows it has not come out. Everything that's come out about Gravano, everybody knew.
Right. And I can't, I mean, I'm amazed that he sticks to the code to the point that he won't even break it to save himself.
And you think that's it, sticking to the code?
It's the only reasonable
Let's assume that there is, it goes to the jury, as it clearly will, and let's assume that if you look at the prevailing conventional wisdom that it's overwhelmingly going against Gotti and he goes to jail. What happens to Gravano? What's the deal?
Well, there's two deals, too. There's the deal on paper, which says 19 murders, he faces 20 years. He agreed to plead guilty to something to which he could face 20 years, and that's what he's going to get by the guidelines. And that's what the prosecutors put forward. Now, we all live in real life here.
Yeah.
You know, those papers can be changed and superseded by other papers. I am sure that Sam Gravano will become the Justice Department's top mob witness in the country. He will go on a road show from trial to trial, testifying as to the enterprise, the structure of a mob family, an expert witness giving his opinions.
And they would never put him inside a prison where he could be killed.
He may go from one so-called rat jail to another. But I think that they'll want to keep him fat, dumb, and happy, and that they'll keep him in nice circumstances, and that at the end of his overwhelming cooperation, they will come with a new letter to another judge for a reduction of sentence saying, look at the incredible things this man has accomplished for the Justice Department. Can't we reconsider that? It seems to be the way these things have gone before. They've done it for, quote-unquote, Mr. Untouchable Nicky Barnes.
Right.
Certainly they'll do it for Sammy Bull.
Yeah, and in fact, they're trying to get him out now. Aren't they trying to get Nicky Barnes out?
Right.
Even though he was sentenced to life and several life
Which
terms.
is far more ridiculous, because the science of successful prosecution is to trade the little fish for the big fish.
And they traded
Nicky
the little
Barnes
fish and got
was
the biggest
fish
yeah.
ever, and now they're trading him for having given up all the fish below him. I mean, at least Gravano was one level down.
I got to go, but how much longer do you think the trial will take?
End of next week should be over.
Go to jury at the end of next week,
yeah.
You think it'll be the jury will sit on it for a long time, or for a week or two? Or?
Based on the evidence, they have no right to be out more than 5 minutes, but people are people and you can't predict them.
Great to have you.
Good to see you
Really
again.
a pleasure. John Miller from WNBC and NBC News. I thank you for joining us. We hope you'll have a terrific night, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Stay with us. We begin with the verdict in the Gotti trial. The 10-week trial of reputed mafia boss John Gotti has ended in conviction on all charges, including gambling, racketeering, and 5 murders. Joining me to discuss how federal prosecutors were finally able to win a guilty verdict against the Teflon Don and what this means to organized crime are Ronald Goldstock, director of the New York State Organized Crime Task Force, David Lewis, defense attorney, Albert Krieger, the defense attorney who presented Gotti's case, Mike McLary, columnist for the New York Post, and John Miller of WNBC Television, who has been our own sort of frequent guide to what's been happening in the Gotti trial. Welcome. Before I get to a discussion of the legal issues here, your lead tomorrow in this paper says what? Yeah. Oh, here it is, right here. At long last, Silk Thug, this is the headline, which I guess you don't write, do you?
No.
At long last, Silk Thug starts paying. This is Friday's paper. And then you say,
In the end, John Gotti was still the boss.
why?
Because in the end, he was still trying to control his destiny, or show that he was in control of his destiny, and the guys in his crew started to make some noise. Somebody said fix, I believe, and then somebody else said, where's the proof for that? And Gotti turned to them and went, shh, and they did.
Quickly. Did he believe this would be the verdict? Did he have a suspicion, a feeling that there was too much this time to win?
I have to answer that in two ways. To represent John Gotti during a trial is to be keyed to the affirmative at all times.
Meaning?
He's positive in his views.
Okay.
He expects to be acquitted. He will not accept defeatist sentiments, defeatist talks, even though he will very much recognize the problems in a case, will recognize the potential effects of adverse evidence, but he looks to counter it and seeks suggestions on how to go about defending. Sometimes the defense has to be in an attacking mode, as opposed to a purely as opposed to just pure countermeasures. But then, on the other hand, today, at about 10:30, I had a conversation with him in which we exchanged sentiments concerning what we thought the jury verdict was going to be.
This is Thursday at about 10 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
And the verdict comes in at what time?
About 1.
Okay. And what's the sentiment? What's exchanged?
The two of us conclude that from the little things we see about, and I really can't go into some of them, we believe the jury is going to return a guilty verdict.
And what was his mood when he heard the words guilty, guilty, guilty? And what did he say?
He reached down and touched my right side and said, "We'll fight, we'll fight."
Where were you, Mr. Miller?
Sitting in the third row. And I think as the jury came through the door, you're always looking for a sign. And I think the first clear sign was that to a person, the jurors came through the door and walked straight by without turning to look at Gotti, who had been facing them for a month and a half.
And that said
And that said that there was some kind of conviction coming on. And as they sat down, only one among them in the second row, as they sat down, looked across, stealing a glance at Gotti. The rest, as they sat down, turned to face the judge. And I said, they're going way out of their way not to make any eye contact here.
You noticed that, I've guessed, too, didn't you?
Well, John is going with the old chestnut, that if the jury doesn't look at the defendant, that it's a conviction. I've had juries come in where they did not look at the defendant, and it was an acquittal. And speaking with the jurors later, they said, we just didn't want to show anything so we wouldn't look at the defendant. But this is the way it generally occurs.
Because you're not involved. You've represented organized crime figures, have you not? Alleged organized crime figures?
You had alleged, I'll say yes.
All right. Are you surprised by this verdict, or did you expect this verdict?
I'm surprised by the rapidity, the swiftness of it. I got to wonder whether everything was looked at and examined and how much is taken on faith. I don't mean to minimize the tapes, but I think that quick verdicts always trouble me, either way, but they trouble me.
Trouble you? Why? I mean,
well,
people were
it's awful
swift and sure in their judgment.
Well, I don't know. Usually real swiftness sometimes is so often haste. I think that the jury has to really look at the evidence and take the time to do it. I don't know that a quick verdict means that all the evidence has been examined. And I just wonder whether everything was looked at or there was a decision made on a more global basis and then everything was fit in according to that decision. As in, the guy must be guilty, listen to this, look at that, let's just do it.
Do you think, Mike, the people you talk to today, is there any sense that you talk to Krieger,
Well,
you talk to others? Go ahead.
I think that the reason there's a fast verdict here is because they swallowed Gravano whole. They never asked for a readback of any of his testimony.
Only the tapes.
Only the tapes. Clearly they believed everything.
Are you
or
surprised
at least
at
most
that?
of everything Gravano said.
Are you surprised having
Yes,
been in
because
the...
I mean, everyone had questions about Gravano. I mean, when Gravano says he's a murderer and he killed people, I believe him because there were the bodies and he's clearly a terrible, reprehensible character.
And when he says he was there the night that Castellano got it, did you believe him?
I believe some parts of it. I don't believe that Gotti drove down the block, and took a look at the body.
Well, let's-
I believe the plan. I
It's
believe the
interesting
plan
because
is
if you say, well, I believe some parts of it, but you understand a swift verdict, the reality is that some parts of it you don't believe. And one of the hearts of the system is to say that if you disbelieve a piece of the testimony, you can reject it all as if it's rotten.
Because there's reasonable doubt, or what?
No, it's just bad
Right, okay.
because it's bad, because a part of it is bad, it infects the rest of it.
Right.
But if the jury doesn't believe some of it but comes to a quick verdict, the question is, how did they do that analysis, and how do they parse out some of it that's obviously not true or made up, and then say, but we can trust the rest of it? And that's a very difficult process for us to do, even as lawyers analyzing.
well, lawyers and columnists can throw out what they believe and hold what they believe to be true.
And with jurors, we never know.
The jurors, I think, believed everything clearly.
It's more than with jurors, you never know. I think that all of us have conditioned ourselves to be more analytical than the average person is. The government summation, the summation on behalf of Locascio, and certainly my summation, was in recognition of the fact that this jury would go back and carefully parse through all of the evidence. I think the government is as shocked as we are about the speed of the verdict. No one expected that jury to come back this quickly. I think that's a given. Why the jury came back this quickly, I don't necessarily agree with Mike that they swallowed Gravano. I think they swallowed something else. I think they swallowed the image of John Gotti being the godfather or being the leader of organized crime. They swallowed the atmosphere in the courtroom. They swallowed the pretrial publicity. They swallowed the sense that must come to them of being an anonymous, sequestered jury and what flows therefrom. That all conditioned them, in my opinion, into a relatively fast decision.
Did you were you disappointed that you did not break, perhaps not the right word to use, Gravano? You were not able to discredit his testimony?
Well,
No, in his defense, in defense of the
view. I mean, the guy. I mean, it's not just that he's a murderer and a killer and all of that. What Albert did in the cross of Gravano is to show that every one of these dead bodies was a dead body that Gravano wanted for his own purposes, as opposed to the government's theory. Now, the idea, the image of the breaking of the witness, it's like the Woody Allen movie where he's gagged and bound and mutters at the witness, and the witness confesses to lying. Well, that doesn't really happen. I mean, you break a witness in a sense.
I guess I'm just naive, David.
No, I think we want to see a lot more. And the courtroom is the last arena, and we want to see the ears, and we want to see the tale presented.
And I want to hear what the chief defense attorney felt about Gravano and what happened in that courtroom.
well, I think that I still feel a great sense of frustration in the cross-examination of Gravano. David's right. There were points scored, but the points had to be put together later. The impact upon the jury in examination of Gravano, I think, was not that dramatic, was not that, didn't carry with it that
Could the prosecution
sense.
have won without Gravano?
No way. They'd still be trying to put the Castellano homicide on Gotti. They didn't have word one from the tapes that would establish that Gotti had participated in that Castellano homicide.
In fact, they had the opposite in 3 places.
Yeah. I want to come back to this, but I want to get Mr. Gostak in. Tell me what this means for organized crime. This and the indictment of Mr. Arena.
Well, I don't think it means a great deal. I think it's largely symbolic. It shows that no one is untouchable. Anybody can be convicted. I think that the mob itself is in a period of disintegration. There is a trend that is massive from the last 10 years showing defections in the families, convictions. It's just not made up of the same
More people talking.
More people talking. I mean, it took 30 years for the person to talk, Joe Valachi, another 10 for the next, and now we see a dozen people in the last several years. I think the conviction of Gotti is a blip on this trend, a blip in the right direction, but only a blip.
Yeah. Mike, tell me about what you think about what this does to the myth and the reality of organized crime.
Well, I don't think that Gotti was the big guy he was made out to be. I mean,
What do you mean?
Well, he's really only, 10
He's
years.
only the head of the Gambino
Well,
family?
I mean, but he couldn't last. He drew too much attention.
Right.
He was not a long-term guy. He was not going to retire in that position.
This was inevitable because he was so flashy and because of his
yes, I think
style
so, yes.
that he'd fall.
I think so.
Fall in terms of a prosecution because somebody, one way or the other, of the prosecution or the state would not let him stand. They would somehow make sure that they got recordings or they did something.
He would talk too much. He would do all of the things that happened. Let's face it. He was, he wasn't a good guy as far as hiring practices go. He hired Gravano, and Gravano.
He wasn't a great judge of people, was he?
I mean, and Gravano turned on him.
What?
Kind of past posting, but
It's kind of what?
past posting, betting after the horse
Yeah,
races
right.
and run. But you're pointing up something which I think deserves some attention. That is, you're saying that a person who allegedly is in criminal activities, who is flashy, becomes targeted, and the forces of the state or the federal government are marshaled to obtain a conviction against that individual.
I'm not saying. I'm
Oh,
asking,
no,
do
no,
you
I'm
believe
saying
that?
I believe that happens, absolutely.
And you believe that happened in this case? That
To a great
somehow,
extent,
because he had
yes.
escaped.
Oh, I argue that
Prosecution
there was a potential for vendetta here. He had certainly he had certainly embarrassed law enforcement with the 3 acquittals. Let's face up to the fact. And this is without going into the issues of the acquittals. He had embarrassed them to the extent that they entered into this unholy deal about Gravano, which is a social embarrassment.
Why?
If they had a case against Gotti to begin with, without Gravano, why in God's good name would they let a confessed serial murderer loose upon our society? Because that's essentially what they do. This nonsense of the 20-year sentence and he's going to do 20 years, that's never going to happen. The people who testified against him previously, who confessed to murder, are out in 2 years and 3 years and 4 years, 5 years, I think, for the maximum. Gravano's going to do something around 5 years, more than likely. For 19 murders to which he has confessed, please, a young black, I know what Ron's going to say. We need this, but let me finish what I want to say.
I don't think we need this. I think you're right. I think it's absolutely preposterous. I don't think he's going to do 20 minutes. Forget 20 years.
I also thought they had a case without Gravano, though.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
they
how
had
do
a
they prove
substantial
that?
case against Gravano, but giving Gravano a break, allowing him to cooperate.
It's not a break. It's a little more than a break. 19 murders, and
It's
you're
kind of like
going to be living in Alabama.
It's like moving Ted Bundy next to a girls' school. It's exactly what it is. It's saying we need this so badly. We need this so badly.
This conviction.
This conviction of Gotti, and we need this guy so badly that we're going to take him. And where he was a lying, terrible thing before, we somehow mystifyingly put him up there. And Gleason said on TV tonight, "Whoa, we decided that he was telling the truth." The arrogance that they know what the truth is, and that they can pick it out, and that they can dust Gravano off like he's been to the barber and set him up in that chair and say, "Go ahead, Sam, tell us the
Look,
truth."
that's not quite the story.
No,
First of
they
all, they
said
don't
he's
dust him
not-
off and
he's
put him
not
up. They put him up there, and it's the jury decides whether or not he's telling the truth. Wait a
that's
second.
not
Let me
true.
just finish.
That's not true because the law requires that it be true.
You know,
That's the difference.
he gets up there, he testifies, the jury determines whether he's telling the truth, and they do it based upon seeing him and seeing all the corroborative evidence. That's one thing. Two is, the fact is that it encourages other people from within the mob to cooperate as well. It creates this groundswell of distrust within the mob, and it's one of the reasons why you see the mob disintegrating now. I believe it's unholy in the sense that the person's getting a break, but we do that for lots of social reasons. If a police officer made a mistake with respect to Gravano and searched him illegally and came up with the proof of 19 murders, we would take this serial killer, we would suppress the evidence, and put him out in society. And you would be very pleased with that.
Right, and
No,
that's
no,
the
no.
cost of a free society.
No, that is the cost
which
of a
is
free. That is
different,
precisely-
which is different
no,
than
that
the
is-
trade for
no,
truth in the courtroom.
It's not a difference in
Absolutely
trade for
different.
truth. No. Look, first of all, you would not have truth in the courtroom when you suppress the evidence because no one would ever see what the truth was. Secondly, we are having a test of truth here. He is put on the stand. He is subject to cross-examination by perhaps the best cross-examiner in the country. And then the jury makes a decision based upon all of the facts that they see. Now, at the end of it, they decide to believe Gravano and convict Gotti, and I think there was ample reason to do that. And if, to the extent that you have to make a deal with this guy to do it, it's depressing that we do it. I'm upset that we have to do it, but you're dealing with the phenomenon of organized crime, and if you're going to sow distrust within the family, you've got to do it somewhere.
You're feeding right into my argument. If you contend that they had to do this in order to convict Gotti, then he never should have been indicted in the first instance.
That's not what I said. They had to do it because I think in the long run it makes sense to have people who are in the mob, who can turn, who can provide evidence, come forward understanding that they're going to get a break.
Then you discriminate in whom you select. You don't take somebody who confesses to 19 murders and give him a pass. You have to be discriminating in your choice.
Wait a second. He pled guilty to a RICO, and he was sentenced. Wait a second, Mike. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Now, you may say he's going to get out.
Yet.
Okay,
he's
well,
not
all right.
sentenced yet. The government
the
government has signed its contract that it's going to file its motion pursuant to 5K1 of the sentencing guidelines. You know, and I know, and everybody in the criminal justice system knows he is going to get less than 20 years.
And how many years do you think he'll serve? Sammy
Someplace
Gravano?
between 2 and 5.
2 and 5 years?
That's right.
Committed 19 murders, he'll
Yes.
serve 2 and 5
And
years?
forget about the other crimes. We don't talk about robbery, labor racketeering, anything.
When they trot out these agreements and say to the jury, no, he's going to get 20 years, that's the fraud on the public. That's where the stain on the flag is, because the things are fake, and that's what's
Look, if the thing is a fake, then you have defense
it's
attorneys
not a
there
fake
who
until
says
afterwards, because you don't let them get sentenced until after they've done their dance, and they don't get the 5K1 letter until afterwards. And the way it is that the jury never sees it, and that's why it's a fake.
you have judges to make decisions as to what's an
Judges
appropriate
in part
sentence.
do the 5K dance with the defendants and the government because they're the ones who are free of the restriction. They're the ones who complete the deal, and that's another reason that's wrong with it. The system pulls judges into the trade for truth.
Yeah. Let me come back to the question of two people who were in there. Do you think that they could have gotten a conviction without Gravano's testimony because the tapes were clear and?
I think that they could have gotten a conviction, albeit under false pretenses. They had a witness on the street who was prepared to put John Gotti on the corner during the Castellano hit, directing people's movements. They had 2 gunmen identified by other independent witnesses who clearly worked for John Gotti. They were part of his crew. They had been surveilled with him a dozen times. There was no other mob boss that they allegedly had a connection with, just John Gotti. So you put Gotti on the scene of the murder. You have his 2 gunmen carrying it out. When you roll Sammy Gravano and bring him to the witness stand, then you come to learn, if we accept Gravano as truth, well, Gravano says he wasn't on 2nd Avenue, that Gotti was on 3rd Avenue in a car with him, that the witness, who was the star witness of the case to testify that he heard and saw John Gotti on 2nd Avenue directing the movements of the hitmen, was clearly mistaken. Well, this was the case that they were happy to march forward with.
Right.
When Gravano came along, they said, we will wave our hand over his head, and hello, history, get me rewrite. Move Gotti from 2nd Avenue to 3rd Avenue. But I believe that those witnesses with the tapes were enough. They went into this case with a big press conference where they said, this is the one that's going to put him away. If they really thought that, why did they need Sammy the Bull?
With the remaining time, is there grounds here for an appeal that could be successful?
We believe so.
And what's that grounds?
Oh, I can't give you all of the grounds. I'll indicate to you some of them.
All right.
One,
Quickly.
of course, very quickly, one, of course, is the government's rebuttal summation. Another is some of the things that John was just touching on, the denial of a certain Brady production. A third is the handling of the expert witness who was permitted to testify as to things that were routine
And what did you
mundane.
think of the judge's conduct in this trial?
Oh, any complaint I have about the judge will be part of an appellate structure. I'd rather not discuss
Well, if you
that.
talk about judges and appeals, Albert, I'm afraid that the judge has not been born yet that's going to overturn this verdict, and not because necessarily what happened at trial. It's because when you file your appeal, the name John Gotti is going to be at the top of the appeal, and I think you have a problem there with notoriety.
And you know what?
David,
That's what's-
quickly, 30
That's
seconds.
what's wrong with our system. If his name matters, then he's not getting justice, and that's a problem.
And there are judges who don't care.
Well,
You
maybe
know-
they have not yet been born out.
So John Gotti goes to prison for how many years?
Life.
Face
Oh,
his
about
life.
7 life terms.
7 life terms, that's what it is.
More or less.
Hard to argue about the fairness when in 3 previous occasions he was acquitted against overwhelming evidence. It's not precisely the fact that he was never given due process.
Depends if one time is an armed camp and the others aren't.
Thank you. Pleasure to have each of you. It was an interesting and engaging conversation. We'll be back after this. Stay with us. The news, the trial and sentencing of John Gotti may stand out as a landmark in America's struggle with organized crime. Joining us now is Gotti's defense attorney, Albert Krieger, who you've met. Author Gay Talese, whose lifelong observations of organized crime inspired the novel Honor Thy Father. His latest novel is an epic of Italian-American immigration, Unto the Sons. Also here, Emmy Award-winning reporter for NBC and WNBC television, John Miller. He wrote the afterword to the new book, The Gotti Tapes, which I have here somewhere, and also former federal prosecutor Ed McDonald, who is now in private practice here. Welcome. It's good to have you here. You were listening, I guess, with interest to the stories about Joe Bonanno because of for the book on Honor Thy Father. Let me just, do you believe, and I assume the answer has to be yes, but anyway, what is the most likely grounds for to reverse this decision?
Oh, I can't respond to what the most likely ground is. I know that one of the prime grounds that we will urge upon the Second Circuit deals with the whole concept of the anonymous sequestered jury. The ramifications of it, the dynamics of that anonymous sequestered jury within that courtroom. The development of an ambiance of fear, of armed FBI agents spread throughout the courtroom. I think there were certain reactions triggered that no instruction from the court could affect or cure, and it built in a prejudice that could not be overcome.
What is the feeling among attorneys first, Ed, about the possibility of overturning this verdict?
Very slim.
Very slim.
Very slim. I think that there's a concept that more and more people who have been watching TV and reading the newspapers in the last few days are becoming familiar with, and that's the concept of harmless error. Every trial is replete with errors, and in this case, I'm sure there were many errors that were committed either by the court or by the prosecutor. However, from what I could see from the reports that I read and from what I saw on TV, the evidence appeared simply overwhelming. The tapes were overwhelming, and the tapes were buttressed by the testimony of a live witness who, although he was impeached, presented testimony that was corroborated by the tapes, and that is Sam Gravano. So I think that under the circumstances, the court is going to be viewing someone who is clearly not a sympathetic defendant, and it's not a sympathetic case, and they're going to be looking at the overwhelming amount of evidence that was presented by the government, and because of that, any errors that can be raised by the defense will be overlooked because the errors were harmless.
Mm-hmm. Also, you're dealing with a defendant who has a credibly documented history with interfering and tampering with juries. in the prior Gotti case, a juror is under indictment for taking an alleged $60,000 payoff. In the case after that, a detective who was assigned to guard the jury
So this
was on Gotti's
this was an
payroll.
incentive and a probable cause to do the kinds of things that...
When you see a government or a prosecution appearing to be paranoid in the way that they guard and covered this anonymous, sequestered, secret jury, you have to say, well, why are they paranoid? They are paranoid through Pavlovian training. I mean, with their juries, and with this defendant.
But even if they're paranoid, it's still necessary for the government to provide a fair trial and to not go overboard in the way they handle the jury. I'm not familiar with any of the details of how the jury was handled in this case, but on the concept of an anonymous jury, going back to the Nicky Barnes case in the late 1970s, was a case where in New York for the first time in the federal system, there was an anonymous sequestered jury, and in going back to that case in this circuit, that is the law that the government is permitted to do that in the appropriate case. And I think that the amount of proof that they submitted in their request, in their application for a sequestered jury here, again, was simply overwhelming.
The evaluation, you know, generally speaking, Ed is correct when he talks about the doctrine of harmless error. However, that is generally applied to evidentiary questions. It is not applied ordinarily to errors which affect the very structure of the trial itself, the heart of the procedure, and there is nothing more to the core of our system of justice, at least in the criminal area, than how the jury is selected, how the jury is handled, how the jury is treated, and what influences or affects the jury. There have been a few cases around and about the country. The one which seems to be cited most favorably now is the Scarfo case out of the Third Circuit, where there was an anonymous and sequestered jury. And the defects that some of which we will complain are are demonstrated by philosophical errors in the opinion in the Scarfo case. As for instance, Judge Glasser gave a charge to the jury at the time of its selection that was based in large measure upon the Scarfo opinion, advising the jury that the reason that they are being selected in the fashion that they are and that they will be sequestered was to shield them from persons such as Mr.
press.
Miller.
Which was totally implausible to anyone who was under guard by an army of armed U.S. Marshals.
Well, regardless of Mr. Miller's protestations, the purpose being, as explained to the jury, that the press might in some way affect or influence their thinking or their evaluation of the case. Well, I think that the validity of that instruction lasted about 30 seconds because it wasn't too long into the jury selection proceedings before the jurors were talking about why they wanted to be excused. These are jurors who had been initially sworn. Wanted to be excused because of fear involving some circumstance that implicated the defendant.
Let me move to one other question. This thing I saw on Sunday today, a juror there whose face was disguised, saying that he felt that he was pressured and he felt, what do you make of that?
Well, I think that's an interesting phenomenon, but I mean, there was a juror who came forward who was thrown off the panel and said, I was thrown off because I showed some favoritism to the defense, and then they targeted me and got rid of me. But this was a second juror, a deliberating juror, who came forward and said, when we heard about the jury foreman in the case, in the last case, who was headed for criminal charges, when we saw the awesome power of the government targeted against this individual, he said to himself, if I hold out for acquittal in this case, they'll investigate me. They'll say I took a bribe. I'll be under pressure. I want to get home to my family. I'll go along with whatever these people want. He had real second thoughts about that. But I think that the most interesting point here is not all of the things that they did, which I consider natural, given the defendant, to keep evil influences away from the jury. They were very protective. I think what's more interesting is who they let into the jury. I mean, alternate number 3, who answered question number 44 on the questionnaire, saying, have you or any family member ever applied for a job with the government, had been married to a former FBI agent. She answered that question, no. This same juror says, alternate number 3, when a juror said, I'm confused about the evidence, alternate number 3, the wife of this former FBI agent, said, there's no confusion here, they're both guilty. was a fox in the hen house. And how did they get in? And when they found out about it, how was she allowed to remain till the last
But
day?
is that kind of thing reversible error? If
Could be.
Could be.
Generally, jurors will not be heard to complain about the verdict that they've already rendered. They can't have second thoughts.
Right.
But if there is an extraneous influence that's brought to bear upon the jury deliberation process, such as an alternate juror who is essentially giving her views about how the case should be decided before deliberations begin, and if she's talking about what her former husband told her when he was an FBI agent, that could be a problem.
They have indicted a juror from the last case for failing to answer truthfully on his questionnaire that he knew people associated with the Gambino crime family. I do not see them targeting this woman for failing to mention her husband, whoops, used to be an FBI agent.
Yeah. Let me talk about this, how you saw the Gotti trial, because of all the years you spent literally living with Bonanno family, in a sense, and getting inside and watching, and then Honor Thy Father came out of that experience. We talked about Mr. Bonanno's, Mr. Krieger's representation of Mr. Bonanno, but now John Gotti. What do you think of this man, and what's it?
My friend Murray Kempton, great journalist, said to me, John Gotti is guilty of charisma. I think the reason John Gotti is going away for life, if that's what's going to happen, is because he came to know and respect people like Mr. Miller, the press. That was his real crime. Bridging that gap between what is supposed to be the isolated world of the criminal, the insular world of organized crime, and going into media. That was the real crime. Being suckered into media, being a cover boy. And I think when Gotti became that magnificent creature of media, both a criminal but a glamour boy, almost a matinee idol of mayhem, he became such an insufferable creature that the government had to reduce him to the degree that it is, and will probably succeed in reducing him, to becoming, as you say, in this place called Marion, a kind of a minnow.
I know you want to jump in on it, but one more question, because I want to hear how you feel about that. Is he a different kind of organized crime figure? Is he different than Joe Bonanno? Is he different?
Oh, entirely different. But both of these people you see are part of almost feudal warfare. You're dealing here in the big world of crime, the big world of war, the kind of leftover Middle Ages feudal wars between these gangs. That's what it is. It's Hatfield-McCoy mafia style. And these people take on dimensions thanks to the press, big names they become. But they're really fighting isolated little wars in cities. And they involve government in a kind of a drama that becomes like a living movie. So Gotti is really like Little Caesar, played by Edward G. Robinson, or other characters that might have been
Al Capone, played by Robert De Niro, or whoever.
So there are living dramas, and all of us become involved, and you to a degree tonight are also involved because you brought together here a group of people who have some connection with Gotti as a result of his headlines. Does he belong in life forever? I think it's ridiculous. I really think it's ridiculous.
The man was convicted of killing about 6 or 7 different people.
He is convicted of killing, I'm not sure convincingly, of, let's say, Castellano. This is the worst thing one can say about John Gotti. He killed a rival mafia boss named Castellano. Now, the world
Well, should he have immunity for that? Because the guy...
No, of course he shouldn't. Shouldn't. But, I mean, life in prison for killing a hoodlum in their particular private war,
John
it's
Miller?
ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's absurd.
Ed,
Well,
go ahead.
Well,
Former prosecutor.
As Andy, I'm not in a habit of quoting Andy Maloney, but I think he was on the money.
This is the prosecutor of the federal.
when he called John Gotti a serial killer last night. A serial killer.
Then how in God's name could Andy Maloney say that about John Gotti when he is primarily instrumental, because he is the United States Attorney, in working out an arrangement that amounts to a blessing, a kiss, a congratulations to a real, confessed serial killer, Sam Gravano?
Oh, listen, that's beside the point.
Why
John-
is it?
Well,
Yeah, why is that beside
Why
the
is
point?
that?
Because Mr. Maloney is a graduate of West Point. Were there a war, he would have been killing various people. The Mafia has a little war, and they're playing soldiers. They have their own little war. It's undeclared by the government of the United States, but it is a war nonetheless. It goes on in the streets of major cities. It has its war correspondents, Mr. Miller. It has its prosecutors here. It has its defenders here. It's a little war. It's a medieval war. Now, Maloney, were he to follow through with his military career, which West Point provided him for, would have been a major general shooting people, and it would another war. It's a different war. This Mafia war of which Gotti is one participant. This is just a little bit of skirmish involving fellow hoodlums, and they kill one another. They miss. They shoot straight. They shoot crooked. They get killed in restaurants. Restaurants become famous as a result. This goes on, and high drama is made of this, as if it can change the world.
Oh, I agree with you with
absurd.
the high
Absolutely
drama.
absurd.
And there's one thing that's being left out of this mix, and I disagree with some substantial portions of what Gay has said.
Especially the point about the sentence being too severe.
Far. There is a real charisma in John Gotti.
Yeah.
He is, and I think I said it before, a unique individual. John has seen him walk into the courtroom and immediately command the attention of all in the courtroom just by his walking in, not by publicity.
So what do you say? So this man, you had his fellow defendants say the world would be a lot better off. The only thing I'm guilty of is that I'm a friend of John Gotti, and if in fact the world had more John Gottis, it'd be a better off place, or something to that
we'd
effect.
have much safer neighborhoods. I think we'd have less of a drug problem.
Is that what he was talking about? But my point is, you believe, in fact, the thesis that Gay has, because you believe the government did have what?
Vendetta.
Vendetta is the word you want to find.
Absolutely. They had to prosecute John Gotti. He was too big to exist in this world, and I don't know how to finish
John
this
Gotti.
sentence. I agree.
They were like
point
Joe
out
Bonanno. You see, now, Joe Bonanno, our other friend, was an entirely different man. Very demure, very, very quiet, the old style 19th century Don.
Ran from,
And he's free now. He's the one man who's still alive.
But he was targeted by the federal government for 20 years.
didn't put
Gotti
him
was
away for
targeted,
life.
but that's because
They
they
didn't put
weren't
him
able
away
to
for a
convict him.
weekend.
They
They
weren't
put him
able
away
to.
for about
They weren't
10
able.
minutes.
But law enforcement tools have changed since the 60s and the 70s when he was in his heyday.
John
Bonanno's still
Gotti
free.
was targeted and under indictment and even awaiting trial before anybody ever heard of him. He became famous as a result of the murder of Paul Castellano because the popular speculation was that he did it to take over the family. That is where his fame grew out of. But he was already under indictment as a hijacker and a thief and a gambler prior to that, when he was a nobody. Now,
Don't you think the way he dressed was so important, the way he photographed?
Yeah,
but that is
part of his
that-
persona
that is-
before the
too.
Castellano hit.
And it's what made him much tastier later. But I mean, the idea that they simply targeted him and they never would have before because he became famous, I mean, he was targeted before anybody heard of him. The fact that he became famous and made a monkey of them in that trial is what cast the die that they needed to get him. And they were right in needing to get him because no one has the illusion that he was innocent. The debate is over whether he got a fair trial, but they needed to get him.
And the evidence against him, which is used to support these accusations, the serial murder, the finding of the jury, is wafer thin, is inconsistent.
We're also talking about tapes and the testimony
The
of a...
tapes do not spell out the smoking gun that the government claimed. They never did. The other evidence is Gravano. And if I were facing the life sentences that Gravano was, if I was facing the evidence that was accumulated as against Gravano, let me tell you, I think that I could think of a couple of things that you did, Charlie, and that you did, Ed.
Yeah,
and
but-
I'll leave
let me
Gay out.
Gravano was not in for life, is he?
You can't
He has a
disparage
sentence
those
of
tapes.
20
He
years,
talks about
and
who
he's-
got killed and why.
Who did? Wait a minute. Hold on one second. Let me come back.
in totally
And
plain
Gravano was much better on the stand than you expected him, and you couldn't break him as you might have hoped to do.
I don't know what break means. If you're saying that we did not show him to be a liar, the answer is we did show him to be a liar. Did we show him to be evasive? The answer to that is yes, we showed him to be evasive. If you read the first 8 pages or 9 pages of transcript on cross-examination, you see it takes that long for him to answer one question.
But by the judgment of most people, Gravano was a good witness for the prosecution.
you have to go by results.
Right. So the
You
jury
know, I don't
obviously believed
question
him.
that he
Okay.
carried the day. He did. To me, it's incredible that he did.
But he was a 19. He's supposedly murdered 19 people.
Confessed to 19 murders.
And he is not going to be serving life. Why?
Well, that we
the
got
audience
into
may
before.
wonder. Yeah. Oh, you did?
On the show.
That-
Oh.
the reason
watching
he's
the
not
show,
serving life is because he agreed to testify basically in the Gotti case against John Gotti to assist the government in procuring the conviction of John Gotti. That was, for that he gets his big payoff.
What do you think should happen, Mr. Gravano?
I think you should get 3 Hail Marys and 10 Our Fathers from Mr. Maloney.
I think he got that.
John, in the Gotti tapes, what do we have with respect to admission of
There are
murders?
2 or 3 very key things. One is the discussion about Louis de Bono. The subject is brought up, and Gotti says, Louis de Bono, you know why he's dying? He's not dying for any reason. He didn't rob nothing. The reason he's dying is he didn't come when I called him. And there's a lot of background before that about a discussion between Gotti and Gravano about the dispute with Louis de Bono. Well, when you make a statement like that, that doesn't prove a guy was murdered. But when you make a statement like that and the guy ends up dead in his car, murdered gangland style, that's a pretty smoking gun tape.
And Sammy Gravano says he did it.
Yeah, quick, I've got less than a minute. Ed, what does this do? The Gotti going to jail for a life?
like that, though.
3 tapes. What does it do to organized crime? Does it make a difference? Does it change anything?
His absence is not going to make that much of a difference.
And will he be able to control his organized crime family from prison?
It's very doubtful, especially if he's in Marion. I don't know that he's going to Marion, but if he goes to Marion or someplace at a distance from New York, which he no doubt will be
Do you
going to,
accept
well,
Mr. Krieger's
impossible.
point about Marion? That seems to be unusually harsh place to send John Gotti?
Well, there are other organized crime figures. I don't know whether it's unusually harsh. It's certainly a very, very
He's
harsh
not an
place.
escape risk. That's the point. He's
Yeah.
not a security risk, and it's a maximum security place.
Okay. Gay Talese, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roof.
Unto the Sons is Gay's extraordinary book about his own family and his grandfather going all the way back. And Ed McDonald, good to have you here. Good to have you, John. Thank you, Mr. Krieger.
again. Thank
Hope to have you again.